He says when he, oh, there we are.
Okay. Very good. So we'll go ahead and begin this morning. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. My name is Charlotte Schaefer, and I'm with the Community Foundation of Greater Muscatine. And Shane Orr is with United Way. And I'm going to turn it over to Shane this morning to begin a little bit and talking about grant writing. We hope at the end we'll have time for a few questions as well, or you can certainly reach out to either one of us after the meeting if you have some questions as well. So, Shane?
Yep. Yeah, we'll have our contact information at the end so that if you have questions, you can contact us. And as Charlotte said, we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So first of all, just to judge the room, you're all here for grant writing, obviously. The first thing I'll say is that the grant writing that we're going to be talking about isn't specifically for United Way or Community Foundation. It's more of a general grant writing so that it could, hopefully it'll help you pursue any grant that you might be seeking, and hopefully give you some tips to polish up some of those grant writing skills for any grant that you might be going after in the future. So just by show of hands, how many of you have written a grant before? Okay, quite a few of you. And how many of you have never written a grant? You're like learning for the first time. Okay, well, it's almost 50-50, right? We'll figure out how we're gonna, I guess I could just reach behind, couldn't I? So kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about. We're gonna talk about what a grant is, first of all. We're gonna be talking about some grant sources. So there are obviously Community Foundation, United Way are two grant sources, but there are many others out there, and we'll kind of briefly hit on those. Then the bulk of what we'll be talking about is actually writing a grant, the steps, some tips, some things to avoid, things that you definitely want to make sure you're doing, that kind of thing. And then at the end, we'll talk about success and failure. So whether you successfully wrote a grant and you received some funding, or if you didn't receive funding and you wrote a grant and you were turned down, how to handle both of those situations. And then again, we'll have time at the end for questions. So if you have a burning question, you can feel free to raise your hand. We're going to keep it fairly informal, so feel free to raise your hand and ask. Otherwise, we'll definitely have time at the end to do that. So first of all, what's a grant? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Request for money, all right. So basically, the good thing about grants is that it's basically free money. It's free money. So it's a gift for a particular purpose. So whatever you wrote the grant request for, that's what you're going to be doing in exchange for the funding that you're receiving. They also create a partnership between you and the grantor. So there's a relationship that's established there. Sometimes that relationship isn't very strong. Sometimes if you may not have much contact with the grantor, but other times you could develop a relationship that's ongoing, and you can have a lot of contact, and they can provide technical assistance and support for you along the way. So it can be kind of a more in-depth relationship there. You have anything to add to that part? Okay. So talking about some grant funding sources. We'll start kind of at the broad level and work our way down to more local. Broadly, there are government sources of funding. So federal grants, there are a lot of federal grants, and that's usually block funding that runs through state agencies. In addition to that, there's some discretionary funds or earmarks that can come down from a federal level. What you'll see is when you get to grants that are more federal, there tends to be a lot more paperwork involved, and there are a lot more hoops to jump through, I guess is the best way of saying it. A lot more reporting requirements, generally speaking. There could be local grants that have a lot of reporting requirements too, but for the most part, if you're getting federal dollars or you're doing a lot more reporting than you would if you're getting a local grant for a couple $1,000s. There's also state grants. So states can pass through their legislature grants to fill a particular purpose. So the state may have a particular purpose in mind. They set aside funds, and then if you are doing some activity in that area, you could receive some funding, but as I said, it's for a very specific purpose or to address specific issues. So I think, let me see. I'll keep going. Private sources, so foundations and United Ways are another, and now we're getting more local, obviously. So you have your federal, that's higher level. State would be like one step closer to local, to focus on state issues. And then we have the more local sources, which are foundations and United Ways, which would be what both of us represent. And those usually support specific interests. So they're helping local communities, and they're solving either specific local problems, or they have specific local interests that they're trying to address. Usually that funding is coming from a large community funding base. So a lot of those dollars are from local people. In United Way's case, we raise the funds through community members through like payroll deduction, or from local companies. Community foundation, you receive a lot. I mean, you do receive state dollars too, but.
We receive state dollars. We also have dollars from local contributors as well.
Right. And I would say you're more likely to establish a closer connection to the local sources, especially in a community our size. Both of us are very accessible, so.
We're right down the hall from each other.
Right. Yeah, you could. It's like two birds with one stone, right? So that's. I thought that was switching on me there, but. So you're more likely to establish that connection and be able to ask questions, establish that relationship, see us out in the community, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit closer connection there. And then in addition to that, there are corporate gifts that you can get. There are a lot of corporations that have specific social responsibility goals. So a lot of corporations have money set aside for philanthropic needs. They may have, again, in those cases, their specific interests that are important to that company. So a company has a specific interest in, just to give you an example, Kent Corporation. Kent Corporation has a fund through the Community Foundation specifically for food and nutrition needs. And so it's a very specific, it's something that Kent Corporation has an interest in and is passionate about. And so they have money set aside specifically to address those needs in the community. And other companies or corporations are a little bit more broad in their giving, but for the most part, they all have something specific that they're trying to, some community issue they're trying to address, or some specific interest that they have that they're willing to set aside funds for to try to meet the local needs in most cases. And every company probably has a different method of determining whether you're going to qualify for those dollars or not. In all of these cases, the best places to look for grants, there's software out there that you can get, whether it's something like Grant Station, which allows you to search for grants. There are newsletters that you can subscribe to. There are many methods to try to find some of these sources. But if it's a company, or if it's a foundation or a United Way, you can go to their website oftentimes and find out information about specifics on what they're funding.
So for instance, on Grant Station you just mentioned, it comes with a fairly hefty price tag, so it's probably about $700 or more on an annual basis. But for some folks that makes sense because you're so heavily grant funded, you have so many dollars that you need to run through your organization. And to Shane's point, sometimes just a keyword search on different opportunities in the area that you're interested in, whether you're looking local or state, those opportunities will pop up, and you can read through and see, as he indicated, you can read through and see what's the direction, what's the intent of those dollars for. And if it's a good fit, there is absolutely no reason for you not to make an effort to take I mean, as long as you have the time to give, it's certainly worth your time to try to take those chances and see if you can be included with their funding. But again, there's a lot of different ways to go about trying to identify those, and some of those is through networking, or networking with other groups or agencies that may be doing similar work in another community to say, you know, how are you being funded? And they may be able to align you with some of those opportunities as well.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, Grant Station does have a hefty price tag on it, but if you're a nonprofit, you can access like TechSoup. TechSoup is a website that nonprofits can be a part, or I guess it's a website, but you can be a part of TechSoup and you can get discounts on software. And I know they're always running specials on Grant Station.
That's awesome.
It's like because I think we've gotten it a couple of times in the past for like $150, which is it's a huge discount. So, I'd recommend if you have any software needs, but in addition to software, like stuff like Grant Station, you can get discounts on there. But you do have to be a 501c3 to access that site, because basically TechSoup companies make software available for discount prices to nonprofits, specifically through that website. So
Shane just saved you a whole bundle of money, because if you would have done what I said, you would have paid like $700. He just saved you $550. Go apply to the good work you're doing within your agency. So.
yeah, exactly. And you didn't even have to switch insurance companies or whatever that is. Save money by switching, right? So in terms of writing a grant, there are several key steps, and we'll kind of go over these in a little bit more detail, but this is just kind of an overview. So the first step is going to be preparation and planning. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about summary information. That's usually like either a cover sheet or usually the first page of the grant has just general information about your either agency or program. The real heart of the matter is your narrative section. We're going to talk about the need for why do you need to receive the grant. And then after that, there's usually a section that talks about, okay, what are you going to do with the money? So that's who's going to be doing what specific activities are you doing with the program, those kinds of details. Most grants, and this I find is more and more often that this is the case, that funders want to know how you're going to measure your success. So you're going to receive funding, and how are you going to track your success? What kind of outcomes are you going to be measuring? What are you looking to move the needle on? Whose lives are you looking to improve, and what does that mean? So that's another key area that you want to really pay attention to when you're doing your grant. And then the budget. So every grant is going to ask to see your budget for either your program, your agency, or both. And so we'll talk about a little bit about what that looks like. And then just finishing touches, we'll give some just overall general tips when you're filling out a grant, things to look at before you hit the submit button or you mail it off or whatever you have to submit it. Just like little things that you can do to polish things up at the end to make sure that you're presenting your best side to the grantor. I start with this quote, give me 6 hours, this is about preparation and planning. And this quote, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Now, I put this quote up there for 2 reasons. One, I think it's a great quote that shows how important planning is. I put that up there too because apparently Abraham Lincoln never said this. So it's a famous quote. I thought it was from Lincoln, but as I was getting ready to prepare this presentation, I found that the Lincoln Library or the archive said there's no evidence he ever said that. It was just something that popped up at a later time. So I also put that in there for preparation and planning because you want to make sure when you're assembling things that you have the accurate information with statistics or anything you're trying to assemble, that you're providing the accurate information. So in terms of the preparation and planning, you want to do your homework. You want to look at the website of the funder to determine exactly what they're looking for in the grant. You want to read through the application ahead of time before you start working on it to see everything that you need to assemble to put together for it. And even to find out if it's something you would even qualify for. So without getting into the grant or starting to write it, you want to make sure that you don't get to the last step and find out, oh, geez, we can't even qualify because they're looking for something specific, or you need to have, do you have to have a 501c3 of your own? If you don't have one, then you're probably not going to be able to access the grant funds that way. But that also gives you a chance, by looking at the RFP, by looking at the funder, to determine what specifically their areas of focus are, what types of programs they fund, so you can see other programs that they funded in the past to see if your proposal is something that aligns with those or is similar to those, and kind of gives you a good idea of the types of things that they fund, so that if your program is doesn't look like anything they've ever funded before, you may have to really sell why this is important and how it meets their particular needs. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was going to say, if you want to kind of go ahead and I'll have
Okay.
comments at the end.
Yep. So you also want to determine how exactly does your program fit. Can you pull off the grant with the resources that you have available? Can you fulfill the reporting requirements? Usually you can find out the reporting requirements in advance, and if they are pretty in-depth and you don't have the staff or resources to fulfill them, then you may want to rethink going after those dollars, because assuming you do get the grant, you're going to have to figure out a way to fulfill the requirements that funder has for you. So you need to kind of be thinking about that and sorting that out before you take that step to start spending time to fill out paperwork and assembling things like that. And then just gathering your information, documents, letters of support, tax information, program information. You want to involve other stakeholders, so hopefully it's not just you writing the grant. Involve board members or other people in the program, that kind of thing, to really, so that it's not just you on your own, but because you're going to need information from more than just yourself to do this.
No, and I agree with everything you said. Reading through the application first, have you guys ever decided you're going to bake and you glance the recipe and then you get in the middle and realize you don't have some of what it takes to finish it? That's exactly what happens if you don't take time to really thoroughly read through the expectations, and it's pretty frustrating, isn't it, when now you're out of time and you can't pull it off. And so, I've had the opportunity to write some grants, and to Shane's point earlier, for those of you that have never written a grant, I was a banker for 30 years. I ended up at a nonprofit. 30% of our funding was grant supported, and I became a grant writer. So everyone can become a grant writer, and we'll chat more about that today. But to give you an idea, you need to, as you read through, a couple things will happen. You'll be able to start, it'll give your mind time to start thinking through how you can formulate some connections, how you can think through some collaboration pieces. Is there some social determinants of health that you can add together? But as you if you read through it early before you start writing, all that will start to kind of work. And then when you get ready to write, it's going to go much quicker. I would say be careful of procrastination. I think most grants are written on the couch. Because we don't have time to do them any other time, and so on. We're doing them on the weekends, we're doing them in the evenings, we're doing it before we head to work. And so what happens is we often procrastinate. I had a couple situations that I will tell you why you really shouldn't do that. So we had a situation, I spent almost 3 days of a 3-day holiday weekend writing a large grant. I, for whatever reason that day, took it on the USB to work after 3 days. I didn't email it, I only had it on one USB. I plugged it in the hard drive of my computer so I could start to work on it. It was due the following day. I pulled my drawer out and snapped the USB in half. Yeah. Panic. It was a $100,000 grant, which we were funded. But the point was, that one movement of my hand literally could have precluded us from having those dollars flow to our community. Luckily, we have great tech people in our community, and they listen when you're really spazzed trying to explain that you need something right away. But we were working on a collaborative grant recently with a number of agencies, and the sign-in got you in, and then there was a second step, and so the email was set up, but what we didn't know is on the second step, you got another email back saying you had to wait to be registered. So you couldn't literally get registered the day the grant was due because you had to wait for some human involvement. So those are just some stories to kind of keep in mind. Writing grants is not easy. We have to find time to do it, and that tends to make us procrastinate, but you have to be really careful about that. You mentioned knowing your customers. You do need to get to know your customers. It's interesting for nonprofits. So most businesses, they market to the person that's going to buy the product, right? And that person pays for it. It's a simpler formula than nonprofits, because we have clients that need the product, and then we have to go market to somebody altogether different to sell it to them, right? And that's part of what you're doing with the grant writing, and we'll talk more about that as we work through. Keep in mind your audience is going to be made up of people that are feelers and people that are thinkers and people that are conservative and people that are liberal, and it's okay, because all you're going to do is explain to them well, and we're going to talk as we work through on why this makes sense. And the one thing I'll tell you, and Shane already started to touch on it, is the universal language is math. In the end, show how there's a return on investment. Show how there's value they're getting from those dollars. And it's a really important piece. You're going to sell both the heart and the value, and we'll talk as we work through this morning a little bit more about that. And then he also mentioned to have letters of support. I call it gathering a crowd, right? You want to create credibility. You want to show others believe in you. The funder needs to know that they can believe in you to take those dollars and spend them the way they should be. And they also want to know, and that's one of the reasons to think through this early, is that you're not duplicating a service that maybe somebody else is doing, or that when the service you are doing provides it's different than what it might look like, and you have that chance to talk about some of that. So in preparation and planning, those are all things to kind of think through.
So usually there is some kind of summary information that's asked, whether it's you have to do a cover letter, or if there is, usually the front page of the grant has you fill out your web address, your contact information, the name of the program, how much money you're asking for, that kind of thing. While you may have to do a brief synopsis of what the program does, maybe in a few sentences before you get to the meat of things later on, so that the person or people reviewing the grant can very quickly get a general idea what the program's about before they dive into it. And if you do stuff like that, or if you have a cover letter that you need to do, don't simply repeat what's being presented in the grant later on. You want to use that to try to give things a brief synopsis of things without, as I said, without repeating things that you're going to be talking about later on. And usually you're going to have places maybe with organizational history that you'll have to talk about, leadership structure, your mission. All of those tend to go in that summary information before you get to the real meat of things later on. So the most important part of the grant probably is the proof of need. Simon Sinek wrote a great book called Start With Why, and why that question should be the focus of what your grant is really about. Yes, we need people to do the activities that are going to hopefully make the change later on. We need to talk about that. But really, the most important thing is to describe the situation you're trying to address and why there is a need for your program to address it. What's the program's purpose? How is it going to fill that need that's out there? During this, and there could either be questions that are going to talk about why your program is needed, or there may be more of a narrative where you're, okay, tell us why this program is needed in the community, and you have kind of free reign to just write an essay, or if you will. You may see either way, but I'd say the tips that I'll mention here are going to be applicable to both. You want to keep it people focused, okay? Keep it people focused. As Charlotte mentioned, there are a couple of different types of people that are going to be reviewing the grants, and some are going to be focused on the data and the statistics, and others are going to want to hear the human interest side of things. That tends to be the one that pulls on people's heartstrings the most. So you want to use both. You want to use both statistics, but also the human interest side of things. So if there's room to put in anecdotes about people that have been helped in the past by the program, or if there are anecdotes that you can give about why there's a need for the program that demonstrates a need, if it's a brand new program, you want to include those, but you also want to include the statistical details so that the more statistic-focused reviewers have something that they can really sink their teeth into too, and really shows the need in the community or the need for the program. You want to avoid any jargon, acronyms, that kind of thing. You have to assume that the people reading the grant know nothing about the type of work that you do. So the more jargon you add in there, the worse it's going to be if they have to ask themselves, well, I don't even know what this means. Or an acronym. I don't even know what this acronym means. It means nothing to me. Try to avoid the circular reasoning of, well, we need these grant funds to, I'll just give an example. We need the grant funds to purchase more beds for a homeless shelter. Well, okay. See, that's not really focused on the people that are being helped by that. That's focused on like an intermediate step, if you will. We need the money to buy new beds so that we can, you need to really dig into the detail of the people that are being helped and not focus on the more abstract concepts or what specifically you're going to be spending money on at that point. It's easy in this step to really, when you're trying to prove the need for the program or the need for that specific, for you to receive the grant funds, it's easy to make things seem like they're very dire and it's so this is very much needed, and it's a horrible situation out there. There's little hope, but you want to make sure that you can give the reader hope. If they think the situation's so bad, then why am I going to spend a couple $1,000s because it's not going to help anyway because the situation's so bad? You do want to show the need, yes, but you don't want to make the situation seem so bad that it's insurmountable to try to fix it.
I would say skip the ornamental narration, where sometimes we pick the $5 words, the $10 words. I just keep it simple and focused. And as the people that are reviewing are trying to get to the information and learn as much as they can. When you have a limited space count or a limited character count, it's harder to write. It's easier to write a lot. And Mark Twain once said, I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. You need to write the short letter. You need to not make the person reading it do the work because you didn't take time to summarize the information down and get it focused, okay? Because sometimes if you start writing, you're going to lose the person and where you're trying to go. So you take the time to do so. Use funder terminology. If they've got terminology they're using in the grant application, mirror some of that within so that they can see that you're trying to answer the questions that they have. I sometimes say it's kind of like writing a children's book. You want to keep it simple and focused and alive, right, when you're writing. Warren Buffett, who owns Berkshire Hathaway, which is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, when he writes his annual report, he writes it to his sister because he knows his sister has no financial background whatsoever, which is what Shane was saying earlier. And if you've ever written it or read one of his annual reports, it's incredibly easy to read, and you learn an unimaginable amount because of the way he chooses to take time to write it. On the jargon, I actually talk to people. I have one person that I work with that is incredibly bright, and she only talks in acronyms. And like for the first third of the time we spent together, I didn't understand things she said. When we get used to some of that language and the people reading it don't have any idea, you're going to lose the opportunity to sell. So make sure that you work on that. And the other thing I'd say is write it in Word and then paste it into the software. What you'll be able to do is sometimes when you put in the software, you can't even see all of what you've written, or you can't have a copy of what you sent in. But if you start and have it in Word file, then you can just cut and paste it when you're ready. So it's just another thing that kind of simplifies and allows you to do some of the things Shane's pointed out that's important.
Yeah, and the other thing about, especially with online applications, is usually they'll time out after a certain amount of time. So you don't want to have everything written and you go to click submit and you've been logged out because it's timed out after so long, and then none of that was saved. So, yeah. So another part of the proposal is going to be talking about your program activities, and that's the who, what, when, and where. So, what kind of staffing do you have for that program? Are you using volunteers? What are the qualifications of the people that are putting the program on? Who are the direct and indirect beneficiaries? So, who are the clients that are being helped directly, but maybe there are indirect beneficiaries, and by that I mean is even though you're helping these clients, maybe the community as a whole is also going to benefit from the program in some way. So you want to be thinking about that too, so that you're not only focused on the people directly receiving the assistance, but the people that are going to indirectly benefit as well. What specific activities are you going to be doing? You know, what is either where is it? What are you doing? What are your staff doing? Are they leading classes? Are they out in the community doing certain work? You want to talk about what the people that are actually doing the program are going to be doing. And then what's the timeline? What's the timeline for the program? Is this a summer program? Is this very short term? Is this something that's ongoing? Is there a start and an end date? You want to talk about those timelines in there so that it gives the person reading it kind of an idea of when this is taking place. And then where. You try to create a mental picture of where the program takes place. Obviously, it's a little tougher to do that if it's in an office setting, but try to paint a picture, if you will, to give the grantor an idea, or the people reviewing it an idea of the location that the program is being done in. In some cases, they may be able to tour or get it, see exactly where the program's being done. But in other cases, they may not be able to see your location. You just have to kind of explain it to them so that they can kind of get an idea.
Yeah, I would say grant writing is simply sales through storytelling. Okay, so when you think you can't write a grant, you can. Do any of you know a bad storyteller? Yeah, your uncle or your pastor one Sunday, or where they ramble on, you don't get to the point. And so when you stop and think about storytelling and apply that to your grant writing, it's going to make it a lot simpler. I know all of you have probably been on a first date, and so I know you can all sell through storytelling, because that's what you do on your first date, right? And so we have this ability to do so. We do it from when we're young. And all you're doing now is you're taking something that your heart believes in and that you know there's a need for, and you're trying to transcend that through your words. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. You're really trying to take, and you touched on this earlier, but you're trying to take the feeling you have about what you're trying to achieve through your organization, through your activity, and you're trying to, just through storytelling, make the other person feel that exact same way. Because you know why they don't? Because they don't know enough about the program, or they don't know enough about the statistics. They don't know enough about the information that surrounds it. And so you're allowing them to have the information that you have available so that they can feel the same way as you do. You wouldn't feel that way if it wasn't important. You wouldn't take time. You wouldn't believe enough in what you were doing to take the time to write the grant if you didn't believe it was important. And so that's what you're trying to express to them, are the things that came along that allowed you to realize why this was an important thing to continue and do. Typically, to Shane's point, you're going to identify who the character, and that's the underdog. And the underdog may be the person, it may be a group, it may be a community. And the underdog doesn't mean anybody that has to be in bad shape. It could just mean we can be in better place. We can have things look differently for our community or communities. And so just go ahead and try to get information about that. And then make sure you always are accurate. You touched on this earlier, and it's so important. You want to know that if somebody asks you a piece in there, that you can support it, or it shouldn't be there. You want to know that when you list credit information from sources, that they're credible sources. Sometimes you can find stuff on the internet that really proves your point, but you know it's not right, right? But you can quote it. Don't. I mean, that doesn't create trust for you as a partner that you're trying to get funding for. So go find the sources that you know are credible. The people, to Shane's point, that are reviewing it, they may not know much about your program, but they're pretty plugged into the community, or they're plugged into their area of interest that they're asking for funding for. And so, as much as you're trying to educate them, also know that you need to be giving them credible information, accurate information that you can feel proud of when you get the grant completed.
All right, so outcomes. Outcomes are another very important part of your grant proposal. You're going to be talking about what you hope to accomplish. What is the change that you are trying to make, either in the people or the community, or whatever it is that your program is trying to address. If at all possible, you can use the SMART method. SMART method is the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. You got to make sure that your outcome is something that you can measure, and not something that you can't measure. You don't want to make, in your grant request, you don't want to put a promise out there that you're going to be moving the needle or making improvement in a certain demographic of community members, and then have absolutely no way of showing that you're able to do that. So yeah, as you're going through it, you want to make sure it's realistic and something that you can actually accomplish. I'll give an example. This is like the general logic model example that I always would do for United Way grant applications. And the thing that I want to really highlight is the difference between an output and an outcome, because it's very easy to write the grant and focus more on an output than the outcome, which is the much more important thing. An output is just a number that you've been able to add up, basically. So the example that I'll give up here is, this is a smoking cessation program. And so focusing mostly on the outputs and the outcomes, the outputs would be like the number of classes that are being held, how many people are participating in the classes. So in this case, 50 participants start the class, 40 participants finish the class. Now, you may be thinking, well, that seems like important things to measure and seems like a good thing to mention in the grant application. How many classes we're able to hold, how many people are attending, how many people started and finished. All of those are important things, but the thing that is missing is the change that you've made. Now, you could have 50 people show up to the classes, all 12 classes, but is your program successful? That doesn't tell you whether it was or not. All it told the reviewer is that a certain number of people attended so many classes, but it didn't tell if your program was effective or not, or if it's making a difference. And so those things are easy to measure, outputs are, because usually you're recording that information. Outcomes are sometimes much tougher thing to measure, because the outcome is the change that's being made by your program existing. So in this case, 78% of participants can identify 3 ways smoking negatively impacts physical health. Okay? That shows that a change has been made. 75% report being smoke-free 6 months after the class is complete. Okay, now we're talking about the change that's being made, not just the number of people that showed up, but the actual people that are being assisted by the program, the people whose lives are improving because your program exists. So the tough thing with outcomes is you have to be able to measure them. So usually there's some kind of data tracking that you want to talk about. How are you going to determine if 75% of people are smoke-free 6 months after the class? Okay, well now you have to think about, are we going to be making phone calls? Are we doing some mail surveys by mail? You have to figure out how you're going to measure that. So as I said, the outputs are very easy to measure because you're just counting things. Outcomes are a little bit more difficult because it's hard to measure change in a person. But the more you can focus on the outcomes, the stronger the grant, your grant application will be, because you're showing the difference you're making in either the people, the community, beyond just this many people showed up, or we had this many classes, or that kind of thing.
And I had a couple things. So the outcomes are hard sometimes. First, sometimes there's some obvious outcomes you'd like to measure, but you're a staff of 2 and you already don't have any additional time, and you really know at the end of the time when you have to report back in the grant, you can't pull it together. So then you might have to look at a different type of outcome to be able to report. So be reasonable with yourself on what you're measuring, because again, at the end of any grant, you want to report back what you found, and you want to be able to show the success metrics you have available, so that you may have some opportunities in grant funding going forward as well. Outcomes, to Shane's point, helps you get to other funding, because when you start to see that and you have the time to measure that, you can sometimes get to other funding, because now you can show success. I'll also tell you, when you're writing a grant, you're going to write down the numbers. You're going to say, I think it looks like this, and you're going to go, oh, I don't think they're going to think that's good enough. And then you're going to think, should I make it even higher, like the success rate higher? Will that help me get the dollars? Don't. Be realistic with what you expect. Your funders know that you're working sometimes. I mean, you guys are writing grants for all sorts of different things, but if you're working with people, you're not going to necessarily have 100% success, and they know that. But when you have that little thing in the back of your mind going, well, that number doesn't look quite as well as I thought, don't change it unless you truly believe that your first shot at it wasn't correct. I know it's hard because you're in the sales thought process, right? You want to be honest with yourself so that in the end, your grant report and your outcomes look the way that you are best hoping. And again, as Shane's showing, this is a great way to look through, because it's going to allow you to talk back to the heart, the feeling, as well as the data, and when you go for the next time around, if you're looking for additional funding. I'd also say, keep in mind, decisions are made, the reviewers are thoughtful, the reviewers are committed, but the reviewers have a limited amount of time. So keep that in mind as you're identifying some of this information as well, so that you can assure that the reviewers, those decisions are being made in a much shorter amount of time than the grant takes to put together.
So let's talk about the budget. So this is going to show how your funding request is related to the actual costs of the program that you're trying to do in the community. You want to take some time to prepare this and assemble other people. If budget is not your thing, or if the finances are not your thing, do you have an accountant that you can pull into the conversation to help you with it? Do you have a board member who has a finance background? Pull in the other people that can help you with this section if this isn't really your thing. You want to reread the proposal and list off all of the costs or items that are related to the program. So all of the expenses, all of the different maybe income sources that you may have, if there's a fee that you charge for certain things, you want to include those as well. And you also want to get a good idea of if your program is just part of a bigger agency, you want to be able to pull together the agency's budget information too, so that you can show maybe the portion of the agency's cost that's allocated to that particular program. Once you assemble everything, then you can start categorizing things into either expenses or revenues. And every grant application may handle it a different way. They may have different categories that you have to use. So if you have everything listed out, it kind of gives you a better idea of what fits into the different categories that may be on the application. Usually there's a portion in the grant application where you can have a narrative where you can discuss what's in the budget in words rather than numbers, so that you can explain in advance if there's anything on there that might look strange to somebody reviewing it. You can give them a heads up, hey, especially if you're showing multi-year budgets, hey, the reason this number doubled this year is because of X, Y, Z. Or the reason this number is so high is because of, for whatever reason. Usually there's a section where you can kind of explain that in advance to eliminate. You don't want anybody reviewing it to have questions like that and not have a way to ask you what the deal is or why things are kind of out of whack. The other thing I'll say is don't pad the budget. It's easy to say, well, we need 10,000, but chances of us getting 100% are probably not good, so we're going to ask for 15. And then maybe we'll ask for the 15 and we'll actually get the 10 that we need. People reviewing the grant applications will figure that out pretty quickly if you don't have anything to back up the numbers that you're putting down. So don't inflate the budget any more than it needs to be, or any more than the actual expenses and revenues that you're going to have from the program, because it never turns out well. I will give you an example. For United Way, we had an agency come in to do a presentation, and their numbers were about 10% higher than the prior year, and it was like, okay, well, why are the numbers 10% higher than the prior year? Well, we just add 10% each year. Yeah, that doesn't go well with the people that are reviewing, because that makes it seem like, well, you're just pulling numbers out of thin air and putting them on here. Do you really need the amount you're asking for then?
I'd say show success. So, there's an old saying, people like to give when the thermometer is partially full. Like, they don't want to be the first giver. And what that just means is people want to give where others already believe in them. So if you have other funders, if you have other donors, if you have other monies already lined up, make sure you're showing that, so that as part of the narrative of the budget, or as part of the budget, so that funders can see who else is lining up saying that we believe in this need, or that this need exists financially. If you're saying, well, we're not, to the point of no hope, we're not sure how this program is going to continue without the money, you may be able to say that once. But the second time, people are going to say, what changes did you make to assure the program to be robust? So, again, they want to assure that the dollars are being well spent and that the activities can continue. One time, I had a conversation with a community leader, and they were trying to dig in and see where some money was going, and I patted them on the lapel, and they said, hope's not good enough? And hope's not a strategy, right? So you have to show your strategies of how you're going to do that, and how you're going to achieve what you're trying to, or committing to do. And some of that can be shown very distinctly in your budget. So sometimes we don't spend enough time on that. One, we don't enjoy the budget to begin with, and then we kind of overlook it. But it's a very important piece to spend some time on.
All right, so some finishing touches. The number one thing you can do at the end, once you've put all the pieces together, is to proofread it, have other people proofread it, not just yourself. The more eyes you can get on that, the better. If you can have somebody proofread it that has no idea what the program is, somebody from outside, that could be the best perspective, because that can help you see things that you may be taking for granted that people are going to understand when they read it. When you're doing, especially if it's a program that's been ongoing and you're in the middle of it day to day, it's easy to just assume that people know what you're talking about. So yeah, if you can get other people to review it, that's even better. And then pulling together any supplemental materials, and that could be anything from your nonprofit 501c3 letters to the letters of support like we talked about before, tax returns, financial statements, pulling all that stuff together. In some cases, you may be able to make a presentation to the reviewing team. I wouldn't say that's common, depending on the grant, but if you're able to get in front of the people that are reviewing it, you want to bring people to the table that can really help you tell the story about the program. You don't want to just have yourself be in there. If you can bring clients, if they allow you to bring clients, board members, other people that can really help tell that story about why the program is so important, so that you can make the impact that you can. And allow time for questions at that point, so that people have questions. If the reviewers have questions, they can ask you if something didn't make sense when they were reading through it.
I'd add, when you, one thing to do, because I completely agree, have someone outside read your grant. But when you read it aloud, because when you read aloud, you'll pick up on things you won't pick up on when you read it silently. And it's a great tool, on whether you're sending an email or a grant request, but reread it aloud. The difference between, as I said, you can say I like cooking dogs and kids, or you can take a comment out and say I like cooking dogs and kids, right? And it changes the entire, maybe the entire intent of what you're trying to do with your grant. So you have to spend a little bit of time on that. Winston Churchill one time had somebody that was supposed to give him a report. And he gave him the report, and he sent back a note on top of it, is this your best work? And so the man reworked it, sent it back, and Winston Churchill again sent back this note, is this your best work? And this went on 5 times. And finally the man in desperation went to Winston and said, it's my best work, what do you want? And he said, oh, if it's your best work, I'll read it now. So the point was, he didn't want, and so often we again don't put that extra work in for the reviewer. And so make sure it's your best work, and there's a lot of different ways to do that.
All right, so everything's done, you've submitted it, and you've gotten word back either that your grant proposal was approved or it was denied. So if it was approved, that's great. You were funded. So a couple things on that. You want to make sure you acknowledge the gift. Let them know. So, sometimes there's a more formal process for that. You may have to sign some paperwork that you accept the agreement. You want to make sure you read the fine print. What are the expectations? If you accept the funds, what are the reporting requirements? What are the expectations? Are there meetings that you'll have to attend? You want to make sure you know all of that before you approve or accept the grant. And then you want to make sure you start the planning process. Get other people involved that are going to be, if it's a brand new program, you want to assemble the people that are going to be kicking things off for you. But if it's something that's been ongoing, you may want to get together with the team and say, hey, we are approved. Let's think about how we're going to measure what we said we were going to measure, or how are we going to pull this off? We said we were going to do this. We got to make sure we do it now. And so that's, I guess, what I'd say on the success side of things. If you didn't get as much as you wanted, maybe it's a conversation on, okay, we didn't get as much as we wanted. What can we still do with the amount that we did get? Can we still do the program, just scale some things back? And again, you want to do that before you accept it to make sure it's still something that you can do. If your proposal was rejected, I wouldn't say that's the time to say, okay, well, that didn't work. Throw it in the trash and move on. Many times you can find out why your grant proposal wasn't accepted. If you can't talk directly to the people reviewing the grant, you can often talk to the organization or the funder to find that out. If sometimes they may not give you any information, and that's frustrating. But oftentimes they'll give you some idea. Either, hey, we had limited funding this year and we had a lot of requests, so we would have loved to have funded you, but there just wasn't enough money to go around. Or it could be something specific. Well, everybody really appreciated your application, but there was this specific thing that you're doing, and that's not really something that what we're interested in, direction we're interested in taking with the funding. You want to find out as much as you can so that you can learn for next time. Oftentimes they'll may give you more information on how to succeed the next time. Hey, we're going to have a specific grant training specifically on this grant application. We'll make sure you're on the mailing list for next time. Or they'll give you some kind of tips on what you can do to improve the next time around.
And I'd say that if something changes, there's no harm in saying we weren't able to use the money because a circumstance changed. Or, we've seen where someone gets other funding and they'll return the money so that a different agency can have the money locally. There's no harm if something changed from what your original request is to come forward and let us know that as well. And to Shane's point, almost all funding applications, they're oversubscribed. There's too many grant applications for the dollars that are available. So probably the majority of the time that you may not be funded, whatever agency that you're trying to reach out to or funder you're trying to reach out to, often it may be the number of dollars. But again, if you take some of the tools that Shane's touched on today and write your story in a way that is even more compelling the next time, or the number of applications may be different next time, and you may have success. So don't feel defeated. What I always say is, If the fact that you took the time to write the grant and try to get the funding for the things that are important is a success. And sometimes you're funded and sometimes you're not, but don't focus back on it. A lot of people don't take the time to make the effort to do exactly what you're doing, and you should feel really good about your commitment to your organization.
All right, so with that, we'll open up for any questions that you may have. Our contact information is up there, so you can reach us by either email or phone. I didn't ask Charlotte if I could use her email or phone number, but I just put it on there. So hopefully, is it the right one? Is it the right one? Okay.
Any way you can.
Yeah, I mean, both of us, I think I speak for both of us. We're very accessible. I mean, you can schedule an appointment to come in and talk to either of us at any time, and we're happy to do that.
We've got some team members here. Jamie Lays is our program manager for the Community Foundation. Shane, do you want to introduce
Yep.
your team?
So I have Michelle Rhodes. She's our resource development marketing person. Kim Warren is Aligned Impact Muscatine director, and then Karina Marshek is our office manager. So if you call in, you'll probably be talking to Karina. Are there any questions? Yeah.
What are your dates for upcoming grant applications?
So we have cycles open right now that close on August 16th. We have funding what we call our impact grants, which is dollars that come from the state because we're not a casino county, and we receive some dollars because we're a accredited community foundation, and those are open. We also have the Muscatine Health Support Fund grant options that are open, and that closes on August 16th. And then with the last, we have some smaller grants when you get in and look. We've got some individual donors that have granting options that are available, and then we also have the West Liberty Community Fund has monies available in this granting cycle. So it's you still got time if you have an interest in applying for the Community Foundation.
Yeah, and United Ways actually has gone through some strategic changes coming up. So our last grant cycle last year was actually 2-year grants for our larger grant recipients, and I'm not sure yet if we're going to be doing small grants this year or not. So, but if we are, we'll have that information out.
You just gave a lot of information, Charlotte. So that would be on your website, all this stuff?
Absolutely. So your website, you can call Jamie and I and we can go over it, but if you go to our website, it lists all the open grants.
And that is Community Foundation of Greater Muscatine?
Yes. Muscatine Community Foundation is the website.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of grants are now focused toward programs and activities, but if there's organizations that are looking for money for things like, a physical kind of thing or some type of project, a one-time type of thing, what suggestions do you have for that? Where it's maybe not a people focus.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of that in our granting portal. Those types of things are funded as well through the Community Foundation. But I think it goes back to just making sure when you look at the different options that are available to see that it's a fit underneath of what that particular granting funder is looking for. But in our community, we have some of those, and I know that you'll find some of those in other. And sometimes if it's project-based, there may be even some national organizations that align with that type of project, and they will have granting cycles open as well. And usually you can find most of that on the website, but don't hesitate, just like you would call us, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call those agencies and ask them questions as well.
Yeah, they usually have somebody that's handling their grant requests for them, so that you can talk to and see if your project is something that they may be interested in funding. Those are always tough. It's always tough because so many funders want you to be self-sustaining and don't want to pay for certain specific things. Like they want you to focus on the clients and not the other things that actually keeps you in operating day to day. So it's always tricky. Yep, I think you were next.
Is there a certain way you can follow up on your grant so that your grant doesn't get confused with another organization that could be running just like along the same program as yours, but yours represents in a bigger source?
Mm-hmm.
So when you don't receive that source, it really cuts your business down 90% automatically. How can you stop that from happening? Because it can happen like the check can come to your business.
Oh, sure.
Your club's name on it, but the wrong person's name's on the check.
Yeah.
And that's why you know, some of the group can get frustrated and give up, but I say this is a time to put some more education on where the money should be directed.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that you can, a lot of that you can address in the actual grant application. I would say, you know, just be upfront and say, hey, there's another organization in town that does something similar. Here's how we're different. And hopefully with your contact information, that can get matched up.
If you're hearing obstacles, definitely, the things that pop up about your organization, you're hearing those, address those as part of the grant application. I completely agree. You have room for narrative in almost all of them, or you'll have a place where you can attach additional information. Use those so that you get that clarifying information in the right people's hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some grants, like larger companies, require an invite to submit a grant. So how do you get an invite? How can you get an invite to submit a grant when you know their mission and your mission, are a good partnership? How do you get an invite?
So the last organization I was with, we did actually get invited to apply for a grant, and it was relationship based, but we didn't recognize there was dollars even available. So you're building your relationships, and sometimes those relationships bring those invites to you. If you find a source or you know of a source that currently is providing those, again, if there's a way to contact the organization, just discuss what you're doing, give some information. The person in the agency may see that it's a great fit, and then when it's time for the invites to go out, you may be included that way. But you've got to do some relationship work in order to get to the invite. You may have a different answer, but that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately sometimes it's who you know or the contacts that you have. So if there are groups or groups of organizations that are similar to what you're doing, join newsletters, attend meetings, attend conferences. A lot of times there's a conference on whatever the topic is that you're trying to find a grant for. And by attending conferences or regional meetings or whatever it is you can attend, you can then interact with people that may be the ones doing the inviting, just to kind of get some exposure for your program or organization out there. I mean, almost without fail, there are meetings or conferences centered around whatever that topic may be, and that may be a way to get in front of people that are doing the granting. Because
It's a larger, say for instance, it's a larger like for-profit company out of like Chicago.
Sure.
Would you recommend contacting like local, like their local franchises, something like that, and make a connection at one of those to see if they can help open the door to that?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't stop. If that doesn't open the door, I would go ahead and call. They're going to have a foundation contact or a community promotion contact that you can reach. But I wouldn't. If one door shuts, I'd go ahead and try to open the next. Okay. The other thing, to Shane's point, this isn't about being invited, but some agencies or some funding sources will. You being involved in their meetings that they're setting up, if they're bringing people together, it does help get grants. We had a grant that we applied for at one point from a statewide agency, and we missed it by a point because we hadn't attended the meetings they had, because we didn't know we were supposed to attend their meetings. And I can assure you the next year we didn't miss that point. So sometimes your learning curve is hard because everything you're doing is right, but they have back to that, and it wasn't clear to us because we hadn't seen the application. So make sure if you've got something in mind, it's okay to look at it 9 months in advance if you can get the application, or have to send what the application was last year for you to look at those things as well. But being engaged and involved opens doors.
yeah, we're a little over time, so we want to make sure that we're being respectful of your time today. Maybe take one more question, and then if you have other questions, you can stick around. I mean, I don't know about your schedule, but we'll stick around for a few minutes. Pete?
Yeah, they always say that you're not supposed to support salaries, with your grants, and then but you know that it impacts your bottom line if you put something out there. So how do you spin that to get the right verbiage in there so the reviews can accept it.
Well, I think when you're talking about operations cost, I mean, if it's through operations cost is a need to provide the services you're providing, you need to show that as part of your request, because many of the services that exist wouldn't exist if there weren't people to do them. You know, that unfortunately we can't get enough volunteers sometimes, and you want to have good people that are well educated in the services that you're providing. So I think that's just part of the narrative of information. However, I will tell you, there are grants that you're going to find that say, you know, we don't fund operations costs, and then you look for a different piece that they can fund for you, and you go find, or you go out to your donors and have them help with the operations costs. But make sure you look to see what will they fund, and if they say I won't fund operations, then talk to them about a different part of the program that still has to be funded, and get those dollars that will, you know, it puts the pieces of the puzzle together for you.
That's
Restrictive views on nonprofits. I mean, it's
yeah. That is the trickiest thing, I tell you, is the trickiest thing, because you run into that with, seems like a majority of funders have that mindset, and it's tough.
And I think just raising those conversations, hopefully maybe people's minds will start shifting around from that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, everyone. As I said, we'll be sticking around if you have questions, or you can take our contact information and call us, and happy to talk to you afterward as well. Thank you.